So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. A lot of collision out there these days, let me tell you. So thank you for making us part of your day. It means a lot to me. I know you're all busy people, your moms and your dads and your grandparents, and you're busy with life. But I thank you for making us part of your day. If you like what you hear, I say this every week, share it with your friends, share it with your relatives, because the people I bring to you on a weekly basis are amazing people. And today is certainly no exception. I have the pleasure of interviewing today Dr. Christopher Flannery. He has done a lot of things. He is a professor. He was a professor at the Azusa Pacific School there in Azusa, California, professor of politics. He was also one of the founding members of the Claremont Institute way back in 1979, which Claremont Institute, for those of you who know, is a very influential think tank based out of Claremont, California, Claremont colleges out there in Claremont. And so, Dr. Christopher Flannery, thank you for making the time to come on the Hamilton Review.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I would like you, as I ask all of my guests, to tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, where you're from, what are the things, the inflection points along your life that made you who you are today. So, Dr. Flannery, the microphone belongs to you.
All right. Well, I grew up in Southern California, an area you're very familiar with. So I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. My father was from Maryland. My mother was from Nebraska. So it was a very common California story, right? They came from elsewhere to LA. My father fought in World War II. And when he got out of World War II, he married my mother and had a family out there and raised them in the San Fernando Valley. Went to a Catholic school in the valley named Our Lady of Peace, and certainly that was first grade through eighth, very influential. A bunch of very good nuns teaching us there, and really an old-fashioned, solid education. So I'm grateful for that. I was lucky to get that. Went to Catholic high school, similar kind of influence, and then went to a local university, Cal State Northridge is what it's called now. Majored. I was an English major, and I did that because I tried various things. I didn't have a definite life plan, and I found that reading textbooks was pretty boring. And in as an English major, you got to read the real thing. You got to read novels and plays and poetry, and that was just a wonderful opportunity, and it encouraged me to want to do more of that. So I went from there to study classics in Greece in a program over there for a year, way back in 1971, 72.
Wow. Okay.
And that was great. It was a real. It went from reading, say, Shakespeare and Mark Twain and so on, to reading a lot more of Plato, Aristotle, Aeschylus, Thucydides, all these wonderful ancient Greek writers. And that probably was the first step in my education that really gave me a direction and inspiration. And I went from there to back to California, back to Claremont Graduate School, which had then a wonderful graduate program, which really allowed me to study more broadly than you usually do in a graduate program. So I was able to continue to read Shakespeare and also read classics and also study history and politics, and without narrowing down into a sort of pinpoint. So that education in Claremont with a certain school of thought that we can talk about if you're interested in was decisive in my intellectual development.
Sure.
While on my way to a Ph.D., I stopped to get a master's degree at the London School of Economics in international history, because I found that, this was back in the 70s, and those who remember something about those times will know that the world was very obviously shaped by World War II. By World War I and World War II, you could still feel that just the whole political arrangement of the world. And I knew
Sure.
nothing about those events.
Yeah.
So I went to a master's program that studied nothing but the world 1914 to 1945. And then I came back and finished my PhD. And
And that was, and you did that at Claremont back
back
over
at
at,
Claremont. That's
yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So that's pretty much the education part of it. And then some friends of mine and I, we really had the notion that we wanted to do something. We were all interested in academics and in teaching, and all of us had been influenced by our own studies in ways that were decisive for our lives. And we all went on and wanted to do that. But we wanted to add a dimension to it, which was more overtly public, you could say. And so we started this thing, the Claremont Institute, where we could write and speak and teach more for the general public while we went on and pursued our academic careers. So
that was in 1979, and the
that was
Claremont.
in '79.
Yeah, amazing.
And the Claremont Institute is still not just still; it's become more active and better and more influential in the last 10 years than it was in the first 3 decades. So I'm really proud of it. But I went on then and had a teaching career at Azusa Pacific University, and taught there for over 30 years, and retired teaching in the honors program there in the Honors College, which is a wonderful place. And it's when I retired from there that I decided I wanted to try this experiment with these American stories, this American Story podcast that you and I have talked about.
Yeah, and we're going to get to your podcast a little bit later on the show. I think that the Claremont Institute. I guess you tell us a little bit about when I think about it, and I am of course acquainted with the Claremont Institute. It is what I would call a think tank. But what is I guess that I don't know the overall vision of the Claremont Institute. Could you kind of break that down for us?
Yes, very easily. So the Claremont Institute has a very clear mission, and I think I can quote it pretty much verbatim. Its mission is to restore the principles of the American founding to authority in American life. So that's the mission. And the means of carrying out that mission is by teaching and writing and publishing. So there is a quarterly journal called the Claremont Review of Books, which is a wonderful publication. I'm a contributing editor to it now. And it's very, it's not footnoted, but it's very scholarly, it's got the best thinkers and writers on virtually any subject you can think of, but especially on subject that has to do with America, with Western civilization, as you've talked about, and with the great issues facing us in our time. So it's got the Claremont Review of Books, which is one important thing it does. It's got online publications. One is called The American Mind, which has, again, writers and thinkers and podcasts and so on coming out all the time, every day.
Sure.
And it has fellowship programs that started back in 1979, and they've added several others. But fellowship programs for college graduates and early grad students. Another separate one for early professionals, people who might be going into the law, not leave the law side, they might be going into the television business or the media or government. There's a fellowship program for them. There's one for graduating law students called the Marshall Fellows Program. It's meant to teach them about American constitutional law. And so the fellowship programs are a very important aspect of what the Institute does. And the curriculum for all those programs, which varies. If you're teaching lawyers, you would do it one way. If you're teaching recent graduates who are going on to academic careers, you teach it a different way.
Sure.
But each of these fellowship programs is intended to perpetuate the really rich and complex understanding of politics that you see at the American founding, and to bring it to bear in political commentary today, actively in our politics, in our foreign policy, in our courts of justice. So the fellowship programs are very, very important. And I get that's the kind of thing. So you get the idea.
So, when you alluded to this idea of Western culture. When I think of Western culture, I think certainly I go back to the ancient Greeks. I also think about Jerusalem. I think about the ancient Hebraic, the Ten Commandments and the Mosaic Law, of course, the Noahide law, and and obviously there was a certain influence from the Romans, and this is the culture that I think has made a gigantic difference in the world we know today. When you talk about Western culture, what are you talking about? Can you give us and why and a corollary question to that? Why is it important?
Yeah. I can give you a very, very formulaic answer. That is, I think that Western civilization, I would call it Western civilization for a reason rather than just Western culture. But Western civilization is essentially constituted by, if you want to speak metaphorically, by Athens and Jerusalem, or reason and revelation. Those are the two essential ingredients of Western civilization. And of course, as you say, they are carried forward through the Roman Empire, through Western Europe. And I would say they meet in America, in Philadelphia, you could say, with the American Revolution and the American founding. You find this amazing tradition of reason and revelation, Athens and Jerusalem, really obviously carried on through the Christian West, and coming to America and having in America a really a new birth of vitality and freedom. So I would say that the American Revolution and the American founding are great expressions, great distillations of all of the key ingredients of Western civilization in an unprecedented way.
Yeah.
So, and yes, as you say, and has done great good in the world, which would not have been done otherwise.
I look at colleges right now, and I see these headlines in the newspaper saying that Western civilization is no longer taught at our universities. They're beginning to, Western Civ, as it was called when I was in college, is now passé. And there actually is kind of an elective, I guess, that people want to take it, but it isn't one of the core subjects in some of our major universities. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's true. Something like that, that's been going on for a long time. We are seeing now that it is just reaching really catastrophic proportions. But even back when the Claremont Institute was being founded back in the late 70s, you already saw the early stages of what we're seeing now in our universities. I don't know if you remember the old chant at Stanford University, which was in the early 80s. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. Do you remember that at all? Maybe you're too young to remember that.
No. I remember that very, very well. It was, hey, hey, ho, ho. I think it was kind of a ho, almost like a ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh type of thing.
Yeah.
Because that was what the radicals, anti-war radicals would oftentimes. By the way, friends, Ho Chi Minh was the head of North Korea at that time. So for those, but they would oftentimes chant "Ho Ho Ho Chi Minh" as their the Vietnam dissenters. And Vietnam is Vietnam is a whole different conversation. But when they would say "Hey ho, hey ho ho," Western civilization has got to go. That you're right. That was happening in the 60s and early 70s, and clearly, I think that let me pose a question: if Western civilization does go, what do we get?
Yeah, well, you get more or less what Western civilization replaced. You get barbarism, and you see that in our country now. I mean, go to San Francisco, walk the streets of San Francisco, go to Oakland, and see the human feces in the street and the needles strewing the street and people assaulting strangers without any consequences. It is barbarism and chaos is what you're getting, and we're seeing it in our country now. So it's not an abstraction; it's a reality, and you can go to basically any major city. But San Francisco is a model. New York is similar. Minneapolis. Portland, name a significant American city. there is chaos, lawlessness, barbarism, violence, and no, and So what do you lose? You lose the rule of law. You lose civil peace. You lose all of the really remarkable accomplishments of over 2,000 years, which you had seen flourishing in America, you could say, a half century ago, in the 1950s.
Yeah. No, I think that when you hear this defund the police, these people who call for defunding the police, well, I think you're seeing a little bit of that in Chicago right now with the defunding the police. Well, they've defunded the police. They have a lot of murders going on in Chicago every weekend, and that seems to continue. It's a very unique time, and I think that most people who are thinking. They're going to vote with their feet. They're voting with their feet in San Francisco. I think that about 10% of the population of San Francisco has exited San Francisco. And if they don't figure out a way to reverse, and also retail stores are leaving San Francisco. I just saw another report that another big chain of stores are leaving downtown San Francisco. So they're not going to have much left for people to go to, really, if they don't begin to reverse and rethink some of their ideas about governance up there. And I think you're right. When you lose Western civilization, you basically lose civilization. You lose that sense of peace and that sense of safety that I certainly grew up with. Thinking about my childhood, and I'm sure you'll agree here, growing up in the San Fernando Valley, you probably had a somewhat idyllic life as a kid. What was life like when you were a kid growing up in the San Fernando Valley?
It was idyllic. As old people say, I walked to school. It was about a mile or so to school. We would walk to school. It was always a great adventure. We walked through neighborhoods, say hi to neighbors, walk home, and play touch football and even baseball in the streets outside our house. Play hide and seek at night, right? And your father would whistle for you from the front porch when he wanted you to come home for dinner. It was, and children were safe. They felt safe. Their parents knew they were safe. The neighborhood, neighbors knew one another. It was almost something out of Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah. No, I had the same kind of childhood. And I remember just, there was never, ever any fear that there was going to be a kidnapping or violence or anything like that. I think that, we walked to school as well. And I'm thinking about today, I live near a junior high, and virtually there was a lineup of cars a mile long to get into this junior high school, with everybody dropping off their kid and nobody walking to school is shocking to me. That and I asked some of these parents, and I say, why don't you, because these are my patients. And I say, why do you drive your kid to junior high? And they go, we're afraid. I go, serious? And they're afraid to let their kids walk because of just, I guess, violence or kidnapping or something. But they're not allowing their children to get out there and even walk to school. So it's an interesting time. Okay, I want to come back and talk a little bit more about this. I also want to talk about your American Story podcast, which I think I was able to listen to a couple of your shows. Great shows, by the way. And we'll talk about that, friends, when we come back. But we are having an interesting conversation with Dr. Christopher Flannery. He's a remarkable man, has done amazing things, including probably one of the biggest things. He was one of the co-founders of the Claremont Institute. Very vibrant think tank in America today. So, Dr. Flannery, don't go away, and friends, don't go away. You're listening to the Hamilton Review. We will be right back.
The Hamilton Review podcast is brought to you by Hamilton Babies, 9 kid-friendly products designed for the little loves in your life. Find them at hamiltonbabies.com or amazon.com. Also consider Dr. Hamilton's recently published book, 7 Secrets of the Newborn, available at Barnes & Noble, your local independent bookstore, and amazon.com.
So, friends, welcome back to the Hamilton Review. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Christopher Flannery. Dr. Flannery, before we took a break, we were talking a little bit about this whole idea of Western civilization, and your answer to my question, what happens if Western civilization goes away, is barbarity. And we are seeing that certainly in California. Portland, Oregon is another example. Minneapolis, the different cities around the country that seem to be having a tough time. Chicago, another one. So I like to be a person that leaves my listeners with some hope and ideas. And so I'm going to ask you, what do people do? We're seeing an erosion of what we have historically appreciated about America, which was the civility of America, and also the blessing of just being an American, just the prosperity, the goodness, the safety, the freedom. How do people, in their houses, listening to the show, what recommendations would you make to them? These are young parents with kids. What do they do? What kind of thoughts do you have for these young people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're right. Despair is not only a sin, but it's a mistake. You have to act with hope for your children, for the next generations, and you have to do what you can to help the world be a better place for them. And so a couple of things that are a lot of your audience, as you say, are young parents. They have children, and God bless them. I mean, that is the family is the most important unit in civilization, in preserving civilization. So one thing is, to be sure, cultivate your family. They're your children. They are your responsibility. They're your blessing. And you have the greatest influence on them in their lives. Help them get the education they need. There are lots of ways to do that. I mean, I can mention things I'm familiar with, but there are resources out there for every parent. If you want to make sure that your children learn about American history, learn about Western civilization, learn about Christianity, or if you're a different religion, learn about that. You know where to find good sources to do that. Take the responsibility to do that. Your kids are going to go to school unless you're homeschooling them, and homeschooling, as you know, has become an increasingly attractive option for a lot of parents because our schools have become so bad, not only bad, but even dangerous, not just to the minds, but to the bodies of the students in them. So, but if you're sending your students to school, your children to school, and if they're sending them, say, to a public school, it doesn't matter the school, make sure you're involved. So what you can do this, make sure that you pay attention to what they're teaching, what they're reading, ask questions.
Sure.
They are obliged to tell you if they try to tell you that they're not going to tell you what they're teaching your children, you're in the wrong school. So take responsibility as a parent. It's a great blessing and a great opportunity being a parent, and your children need you more than anything. So that's one just simple, practical thing. You couldn't get involved in the school board. Also, speak up, identify neighbors and friends, maybe who are also going to the same school, who are concerned and think the way you do. Support one another. One of the biggest things that prevents us from kind of overcoming some of the really dominant influences of our time is, well, they're intimidating. They can be frightening. They'll shout you down in a public meeting or try to intimidate you somehow. If you have a friend, a neighbor, another few parents who will support one another, that can really help you. And the truth is, as we were talking about, most of the people out there agree with you that there are serious concerns out here. There are a lot of crazy things being taught our kids, and we should correct that. Help that agreement express itself by speaking up yourself. It takes a lot of courage, I know.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That's one kind of path to take. I'll mention something specific for parents who are looking for these things. You and I have talked about Hillsdale College, and I think you read their imprimis and read something I wrote there. Hillsdale College, there are other places that have this too, but Hillsdale College offers many free courses on practically every subject, from biology to American history to the Constitution, Western civilization. So you can go online to Hillsdale College and find all kinds of courses for the parents to teach themselves or for their children to join them in. There's also this national movement that is centered in Hillsdale College of classical schools. If you're looking for a school for your child where the curriculum is completely reliable, where the teachers and the administrators are completely reliable, and I mean professionally and ethically and morally and intellectually, You can go to Hillsdale College, look up their classical schools. They've got dozens of them, and dozens more are coming into existence.
Yep.
And they have a complete and really traditional curriculum of your math, science, literature, history, ethics, and that's one wonderful opportunity. If you're not homeschooling, if you've got a chance to pick schools, look for a Hillsdale school.
Yeah. I have a granddaughter who's going to a classical school up in Camarillo, and I have to tell you, I'm blown away by how good that school is. And it's kind of a hybrid. They go to school a couple days, and then they're also home a couple days. But she is so bright, and she's just blossoming in this classical school. So I think this is I haven't heard much about classical schools. I know about my granddaughter, but I do think that they are becoming more common. I've heard of another one opening up here in the Los Angeles area as well. So I think this is a trend. And if our public schools continue to really not deliver education, I think that more and more people who are thoughtful, who are really thinking, they're going to pull their kids out of the public schools, and they're going to look for other options. And I think the classical
some of these schools are charter schools, and where you can, whatever money you've been paying to go to public schools, that can be shifted over and paid for in a charter school. So they don't have to be budget busters either.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily private schools. They're more because charters typically operate within the auspices of the public schools, but they're just charter schools, and that is obviously makes the education free for the parents, which is critical. I mean, because education is expensive.
So there are increasingly charter schools that offer this classical education too. So
yeah, okay. Well, that's something, friends, to look for when you're looking for an educational opportunities for your children. Any other thoughts, my friend?
Just about parents.
Yes.
Especially young parents. I know for myself, being an old parent and a grandparent, there are many things that we don't know ourselves, as parents, about, say, things we want our children to learn. So I would say join with other parents and take courses together, like whether it's in, Western civilization, a Shakespeare course or a course on the American Revolution, readings, do there are collections of readings that you would want to do together, or you could do them with your family. Again, all the way from Shakespeare to Thomas Jefferson to Lincoln or Mark Twain. So just doing those things together as neighbors, friends who also have children together, say going to school. It was an old tradition for families to read together.
Yeah.
They had books, whether it was stories or poems, or obviously to sing together, that kind of thing. I mean, make your family a place that is actively learning together, talking together about these important questions, and that really is, a foundation of civilization, the most important one in a way. So.
Yeah, I recommend during one of the things that I tell my families is eat together, have meals together, because when you sit down and you have a meal, and by the way, you turn off the TV, you turn off your devices, you turn off your cell phone, and you actually engage in the conversation. And families who eat together, I think, Dr. Flannery, you know this, that simple little time of, communion with your children and your spouse. Those kids who have a meal together with their family have lower rates of delinquency. They do better academically. They have less sexual exploitation and other, issues that drugs and alcohol, all these different things that are trying to pull our kids in the wrong direction. They have less rates of problems. And so that's something,
you know that professionally. And I know that from personal experience. When my kids were little, they were old enough to be in school, so they were getting exposed to other kids, and we always ate meals together. Now this was quite a while ago. This was 30 some years ago now. But even then, they would come home and say, "Gee, Dad, Bobby doesn't eat together. He gets to go on his, his computer, and his parents are doing this, and we we're unusual that we
Yeah.
were eating our meals together." We said, "Well, we're just going to have to be that way." But it really, even back then, I'm sure today, with all the devices and
Yeah.
all the scattered demands on our time, that problem is even greater. But what professionally, I affirm from personal experience, just that one steady habit every evening of eating together is critical